We are back. It's the Joe Holka Show presented by FanDuel. Week 10 tournament plays of the week, position by position. Guys that might go overlooked in GPPs that can help us get to the top of the DFS leaderboards. Plus, we're going to show you guys how to use all this information to build a lineup live at the end for GPPs. Russell Wilson is 7,500 against Green Bay at Green Bay. So what are your thoughts about him in tournaments? He wasn't really on my radar, but I'm intrigued on like what you want to say here, though.
I mean, he's not really like a player that's going to pop in any value metrics or projections or anything like that this week. But I was just looking at the slate and kind of thinking through how it's going to play out. And like you said, everybody is going to, most people are going to play Dearness. Like even in the biggest field stuff, he'll probably approach 50%, right? If anything small field, 70, 80%. So we're going to have to do things to get really unique around him. Like regardless of what your build looks like in terms of ownership, we still kind of need to get it down to that sweet spot of like an average of like 15% or like 135% cumulative, right? So if we have a Dearness in our lineup, like playing a Josh Allen with a Diggs, even though they're not like crazy, popular, even though you might get Diggs at 15%, it's still not going to be enough to bring it all the way down. The easiest way to bring it all the way down really fast is to just have a super unique stack, right? And we're all really good at projecting quarterbacks. Like a quarterback generally isn't, you're not going to like separate from the field necessarily with a quarterback unless you get like a low and Lamar go off for like 40 or something like that. But with all of these guys at the top, Josh Allen, Tom Brady, Dak Prescott, like I said, Aaron Rodgers, in that 8K range, like they're all going to be somewhere between like 8 and 15%. We're going to be able to get Russ at, sub 5%. We know he is the most efficient passer of like recent history. And we have a guy opposite him, Devonte Adams, who's going to be among the most popular wide receivers on the slate. Like I think all the wide receivers kind of weird this week because I think a lot of guys are going to fall into this like 17 to 20% range. But again, it's just going to be really hard to get unique with them, right? So take Russ, get a contrarian Tyler Lockett, a contrarian DK, and then maybe even bring it back with Devonte if you want to offset, or just don't even play Devonte. We know how the builds are going to look. A lot of the chalky running backs, those 8K quarterbacks. So it's just a way to really bring down ownership. And again, like the projection, no projection model is gonna pop off with Russ. But if we're lacking one side of the passing game, we know those passing games correlate. So I think it's an interesting way just to get some really high owned guys in a lineup and not have to worry about that too much.
Yeah, I mean, what are we trying to do in tournaments, right? Especially these weeks where everything is pretty much going the same direction. We're trying to find really good players at low ownership, so that definitely checks that box. Do you have a preference between Lockett and Metcalf? Because now that there's no Geno, man, like we just got to pick one of these guys. We can't have both anymore, right?
No, we can't have both. I mean, even with the Packers kind of being down in their secondary, down players in their secondary with injuries, they've been pretty good against the deep ball. Like they haven't faced that many really good quarterbacks. I mean, I don't really know what we're making of Mahomes right now. They did actually try to take some shots on Green Bay, but it's been hard to take shots on Green Bay, even down secondary. So I think I probably like Lockett a little bit more in this spot, and I think he saves you a bunch of salary. But again, like you are getting DK as like almost a perfect price pivot off of Devonte. But I think Tyler Lockett with the salary savings probably makes more sense.
Let's move on to your running back tournament play of the week. Jonathan Taylor, he's 9,400 against Jacksonville. Obviously, Najee Harris is like the exact same price, so I assume that this is like a direct price pivot for you then.
I think it's a price pivot off of Najee. I don't even know, like, I've been trying to figure this one out when I looked at ownership this morning. Like, with all of these players, like we got Eckler, Dalvin Cook, Zeke, Patterson, you can even like say James Conner. Like, I don't know if people are even going to want to go above the $9,000 range with Dearness Johnson, because like I just don't know if you have to that much. And if they do, you got these two guys in Jonathan Taylor and Najee Harris who are both big favorites. We know they both have huge upside. I think people probably in terms of ownership go towards Najee a little bit more just because the matchup against Detroit is so good. So I think we might, even though we just took this game on its own, huge favorite against the Jaguars, kind of a smash spot for Taylor, even at like around a 9K price tag, he probably gets like pretty popular. Just given all those factors, I think he might stay around like 10% this week, which is pretty crazy considering how big of favorites they are. Again, your you got Dearness Johnson mega chalk, so you can look at it a couple ways. You can use Jonathan Taylor with Dearness, which, if you're playing large field stuff, you don't have to use Dearness and everything. If you're playing small field, I think it's pretty bagged to get off of Dearness, but you could either use Dearness Johnson to afford Jonathan Taylor, or you could play Jonathan Taylor with a mid-price running back and you completely flip the build, right? Because and that just, especially because so many people are going to be paying up for these wide receivers, that again, if it, in a spot where we kind of know where the chalk's going to be, if we could flip the build, that's another way just to get a super unique lineup. Jaguars haven't given up a ton of points to running backs, but they've also had one of the easiest running back schedules. Like really the only workhorse running back that they've faced is Derrick Henry. I mean, I get like Joe Mixon was supposed to be good when they played in week 4, but he hasn't been like crazy. They've seen running back committees, a lot of just not very good running back teams. So even though their fantasy points allowed or their metrics against running backs are kind of middling, they haven't faced really a Jonathan Taylor, and when they did, they got destroyed by Derrick Henry. So I love this. I actually think people might like, we see these expensive players, all these expensive running backs. I think if there is like a cheap build that people go to, it's like a Carson Wentz, Pittman, Dan Arnold type build, and that's going to be kind of chalky. But that I think people are going to see Wentz in this spot, and be like, I could pay whatever it is, $7,500 for him.
They're going to have the salary to not play Wentz at this point now. And like at the beginning of the week, I totally agreed with you. Now I think like there's going to be so many more people that are like that have the salary to get to Josh Allen if they want to, that can play the Brady stacks, all of that stuff. So before we move on to running back, I'm curious your thoughts on Christian McCaffrey, because obviously being eased back in, not a ton of snaps last week, but I mean, still saw a ton of usage. He's 9K. Like of this range up there, it's basically McCaffrey in terms of ownership that stands out to me. I'm just not sure. Like maybe it's a week too early. Like we want to see what happens, but like once it does happen, we're not going to have this price anymore as well. So what do you think about him?
I mean, I looked at it because I'm like, we're going to get a sub 10% CMC. And if he gets all of the work, like you want to be able to get those 25 touches or whatever at sub 10%. We've never seen him come off. Usually when he's come off injury, they're always like, oh yeah, we're going to ease him back in. And then he gets a 90% touch share. Last week, they eased him in. And I just think this game is like, people are going to look at the Cardinals smoked the 49ers last week. And I actually think this game could just set up really ugly. Like if I don't know if Kyler's not playing, right?
It looked like I saw something that he was feeling good and hopes to play, but we don't have anything. We don't have anything significant yet.
Yeah. So if we have like two, like, I mean, I know they scored a lot with Colt McCoy last week, but if it's Colt McCoy and PJ Walker, I don't think Cam's going to be ready to play this week. I mean, it could just be an ugly game all around. Just a slow game, not a lot of touchdown upside, and we need to be chasing touchdowns on FanDuel. So I don't think I'm going to love that game in general.
I like that take. I haven't heard anyone kind of come at it from that angle yet, so that definitely makes me like him a little bit less. So thank you for that. Before we move on to wide receiver, if you're one of those people who doesn't watch this live, start next week every Monday and Thursday from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Of course, the big show is on Sunday morning from 9 a.m. to noon to get you guys ready for kickoff. TJ, your wide receiver tournament play of the week, Emmanuel Sanders, 6,300 at the New York Jets. Sanders is like one of those guys that I keep like being like gravitated towards in tournaments, and he just hasn't really gotten there for us, but at some point he's going to. So it sounds like at 6,300, you're still pretty interested.
Yep. We're going to see, like, I'm pretty confident that last week was an aberration for the Bills. I know there's some people just talking about like, kind of like teams have been doing against the Chiefs, play too high against them. They can't run the ball. It's still the Bills offense. They have a ton of really good weapons, and it's the difference from them compared to the Chiefs is we've seen them rolling all year. Like, sure, they had a hiccup and coming out of the bye, they did start slow against the Dolphins and got it done at the end. But the last 2 weeks, one of the reasons, like, I guess we've had 3 weeks in a row without Manny Sanders because they had a bye 3 weeks ago. Josh Allen just hasn't been targeting these super deep passes. Like his average depth of targets almost cut in half over the last 2 games coming out of the bye. The Jets just aren't going to have the personnel to do that. One of the things we saw the Jaguars do really well against the Bills last week is they were able to get pressure with just 4 guys. This is a bottom 10 team in terms of adjusted sack rate in the Jets. And going back to Manny Sanders, even without those super deep targets that he was relying on early in the year, he's still 7th in expected fantasy points over his last 3 games. He's 3rd among players in terms of expected fantasy points on the main slate. That's the 4-for-4 breakout model. So Allen's going to be mega chalky. I think he probably Diggs isn't going to be mega chalk, but if Allen's going to be that popular, he's going to bring some receivers with him. It's probably going to be Diggs and Beasley, and I think Manny ends up being the odd man out. So if we want to get access to Allen, again, we need to do something kind of extreme to offset ownership on some high guys. If you're playing like a Allen Dearness Johnson lineup, you need a Manny Sanders at like 3% to get that ownership down.
I think one of the big mistakes I made last week was I thought that Marquise Brown might come in much lower than he did, obviously. But what you just said about like how the chalk quarterback just by default in tournaments is going to start to bring these guys with them. Like we see it happen all the time with like Diggs and those guys. But last week, like that's something that like there's weeks where you feel like you made mistakes, and normally that's where I get the most frustrated because like how did I think that the cards are going to flip over and I'd get a 10% Marquise Brown when Lamar was like 30% across the industry. So that's something that I'm trying to think about going forward.
Yeah, and it is as somebody that actually does ownership projections, it is hard to like look at things like that because when you're doing projections, if they're going to be accurate, they do need to like add up as to a certain number, right? There's only so much ownership that could go around. So if we see 4 or 5 wide receivers or whatever position it is that are like similarly priced in a similarly good spot, even if the quarterback is popular, it's hard to project Marquise for like 23% because then you're saying he's going to be the most popular wide receiver on the slate. That's hard to project, but you do just kind of have to. And I think we've talked about this earlier in the year, just when all of these ownerships are kind of condensing. And again, we have some super chalky guys, but they're kind of smashed together at wide receiver. Like you're going to have some surprises. So we need to build that into our expectations. Like Diggs is one of those guys, like even though we might project him for 15% this week, he could reach like 22 or 23 pretty easily.
Yeah, everyone wants to talk about how defenses are playing against teams like Buffalo and Kansas City, like those shell type of defenses. It sounds like what you're saying, TJ, is like maybe the Jets just don't have the personnel to even try and do something like that anyway. So like Sanders deep down the field at some point, I think it is one of those guys that could go completely nuts. Tight end of the week, TJ. This is one that I actually am really happy to see this on the list because I haven't talked about Hunter Henry probably near enough. And we're always talking about how I'm trying to grab touchdowns at the tight end position, yet I never play Hunter Henry and he scores touchdowns every week. What's wrong with me?
Well, he doesn't see anywhere near the type of volume of most of the guys we want to play. And I know I keep harping on Dearness Johnson, but if he's going to be by far the most popular player on the slate, probably the most popular player that we've had on a slate this year, then we should kind of be focusing our attention on how to leverage that, right? So these things we've been talking about so far today have been either like pivoting off of it, flipping the build off of it. If you're going to stay with him, one of the most popular things we've seen in winning lineups on FanDuel this year is a running back mini correlation. A lot of times it's been a running back with an opposing pass catcher. We like correlating our tight ends so we don't have to guess as much. It's a slate where we have Gronk, Kittle, Kelsey, Waller, Andrews all off the main slate. Now, I mean, Waller and Kelsey were like, they haven't been putting up those mega tight end one numbers, but they're still like the primary guys we think about are the top tier in tight end. They're off the main slate. And you have Hunter Henry sandwiched between Dan Arnold, Freiermuth, maybe even Noah Fant. Like these guys that aren't, they're not like perennial great tight ends. Like sure, they're coming on, but these guys are going to be the chalk, and you get a price pivot with Hunter Henry. You could stack him with the most popular player on the slate. You basically just need a touchdown to pay off, right? Like you don't at this point on a slate like this, we rarely need we don't need our tight end to go off for 20 points. Like even in a Sunday million, if Hunter Henry gets you 40 and a touchdown, 3 catches, like you're dancing probably.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting one. And I think one thing that people don't do enough of, especially if we're like kind of dumpster diving a little bit for tight ends, is like just play the one that's going to be like 5% or less, right? Mm-hmm. Like you actually get the touchdown from one of these guys and the other guys fail. Like I know it's not like a huge difference on like the amount of points you're getting at the tight end position kind of at both ends of the spectrum, but it is kind of nice to be able to be different there when there is a lot of variance. Same thing at defense. So your defense GPP play of the week, Dallas Cowboys 4,200 versus Matt Ryan and the Falcons. I think this Cowboys team is going to be pretty popular, TJ. So kind of flipping it over and playing the defense. Obviously, this Dallas defense has looked pretty good at times this year. Matt Ryan, not so much. So what's the thought process here?
Yeah. I don't know how popular they're going to be just because we do have 4 teams favored by 9.5, right? So I don't know if they are like end up like, do you think they're going to be double digit ownership?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
It's like this week is hard for ownership for like these middling plays though, because I'm
Mhm.
still trying to get a better feel for like defense is hard. I think there's a couple of positions where I think it might just be flat, but then it's like the mega chalk guys at like almost like salary ranges, not necessarily positions.
Yeah, so that's kind of what my thought process is, that I think it's going to be kind of flat. And I think with these other big favorite teams, I think Dallas probably ends up being the lowest one. So things that I'll do, if we like call it like old school days, like looking at the flow chart, I'm just going to look at these teams that are favorites or the biggest favorites, and then I'm going to look at salary and I'm going to look at ownership. And if they come lowest on either one, they're probably going to be the one that I like to land on, because it is such a volatile position. I think a lot of people are naturally going to be like, well, if I play Dallas defense, maybe I could play Zeke, because that's a nice stack. I actually like the idea of playing the Dallas defense with one of their pass catchers, because Dak pass catcher stack is going to be so popular on FanDuel. Again, we've kind of seen the pass catcher defense stack kind of be a sneaky way to get some not so popular correlation.
Mhm.
And then Atlanta, they do pass at a relatively high rate. If we look at the season, they're like above average. But if we look since coming out of the bye, they're throwing at the 5th highest rate in neutral situations. So even before the Cowboys get up big, they should have a lot of big play opportunities if Atlanta continues that trend of throwing a lot. And obviously we have seen Cowboys, even though they aren't like the best real defense, they're actually a big play defense, especially with Diggs taking a lot of chances. And we saw him a couple weeks ago, take one to the house at the end and kind of make that game just that, like if you had CD Lamb Dallas defense in that in that game, then you're super excited. And I think the Dallas defense and just this team in general, they can make a similar game flow this week.
I like it. All right, everyone out there, you guys know the drill at this point. Now that we have heard from TJ, I want you guys to pause this video. Let me know in the comments your favorite Week 10 tournament play. TJ, you ready to build a lineup?
Yeah, we could try.
Let's do it. You say that every week. Let's try. Let's do it. We're gonna pop.
It's hard, man.
Dude, it's so hard this early in the week. Yeah, this
so
like
early.
Obviously like we're more focused on tournaments, right? So This is the Joe Holka Show. Listener League, $5, rake free, big prizes, all of that stuff. But these are the hardest lineups to make, I think, because like you should be building with ownership in mind, in my opinion. So do you want to start with the stack, or lead us the way here? I built so many lineups today. I need some help.
Well, I mean, we got to start with Dearness, right? I think a lot of in huge field stuff, there's obviously going to be a conversation about whether to play him or not. Like these just aren't the types of plays that we're generally fading if you're playing in the Joe Holka Listener League. It's you're I think it's pretty bad to not be playing this in the small field stuff.
I said it a couple of times now, like these type of players, especially on FanDuel, you're okay if they get one touchdown. If they score 2, you're dead. You're literally dead. And you're not really like leveraging a ton like by not playing them, right? So like what other $5,400 player has anywhere near the type of like volume seal? Like the only way that the fade on Dearness Johnson works, in my opinion, where you completely like vault up the field, is if he gets hurt, right? Like if he doesn't get hurt, like he's probably going to be at least okay, right? So like that just doesn't feel like a smart fade, in my opinion.
Yeah,
so I'm with you.
And it's not a spot where you have obvious leverage plays. Now, obviously, like you can just be like, oh, well, let me just play Jarvis. Let me just play the opposite running back, which you don't even know who it's going to be, because Ramondre Stevenson and Damian Harris are, I think, both in concussion protocol or not practicing. And it's just not a game that sets up for like some crazy shootout. Like if you have like Aaron Jones go down and AJ Dillon's going to be mega chalk, we have very obvious pivots and leverages because we have Aaron Rodgers and Devonte Adams who could ball and take away all the scores. On the Browns, we don't have that, right? So I just think it just doesn't make sense to me. But with that said, if you are going to play this mega chalk guy, like you might as well get some correlation with it and go with the guy that I talked about, Hunter Henry, in a week where I just think it's a really good contrarian tight end week.
Yeah, I like the idea of adding Hunter Henry to this. I guess quickly, if we run the sims, we very, very rarely see a number like this in the optimal rate. So if you were to simulate this slate 10,000 times, 31% of those lineups, TJ, would have Johnson in it. So at that point, like I said, I don't think you're really benefiting a ton from making that fade. So let's move back over to FanDuel. I will get Hunter Henry back in here for you. What else are we doing?
I guess if we're playing Dearness and Hunter, like I know I talked about Russell Wilson, but I think I probably, if I like Manny Sanders, I think he's going to be low owned enough where you can offset Josh Allen's ownership and some of these other guys. So I think I like Allen Manny Sanders play.
I like that. Are you bringing it back with what's his face, Elijah Moore? We were talking about it with Reeves. Reeves seems to think that Elijah Moore is not near as much in play now that Corey Davis is back.
And also the Bills are just really good. They
Also
haven't
that.
they haven't given up any big games. There've been like 200 something 20 plus FanDuel 20 plus point FanDuel games from non-quarterbacks this year, and one of them has been against the Bills. It was against Derrick Henry. Like
Sure.
they just don't give up big games or big plays. So there's not a defense that I think is worth targeting at all.
All right, I want the Elijah Moore thing to happen on a main slate because I love Elijah Moore. I just was what was it, Thursday Night Football or I don't know, Monday Night Football, one of those other island games. So all right, so right now 6,800 the rest of the way, so a lot of salary to work with at this point. Obviously, is there some sort of mid-range defense you want a placeholder as of right now? It makes things a little bit easier to kind of piece together for the people.
Yeah, I think we could stick with my Cowboys call again because
Okay.
we just have all of these teams that are favored by huge numbers, and like I don't think I want to go all the way up to like 4,900 quite yet, and I don't even know if like the Steelers and the Cardinals are giving you that much of an edge for the extra salary. Like the only one I think if you're going to pay all the way up, it would be like might as well just pay for the Bills because they are the best defense. But like paying for the Steelers, Cardinals, Colts, like I don't really love it.
Yeah, I like the Cardinals a bit, obviously, for some of the same reasons everyone does. Like this offensive line in Carolina is just horrendous. But I'm with you. There's not like a ton of leverage to be had there. 7,500 the rest of the way. So now we have tons of salary to work with. What are we doing?
Yeah, I guess the decision here is like, do I want to pay all the way up for one of these running backs? And kind of my gut says no. I think like I don't think Zeke's not going to be crazy popular, but it just feels like it's going to be. I don't know.
How
I
about
really
this? Does this help
can't.
you at all if we say that we all have all 1 p.m. players currently? So do we want to try and mix in some sort of like 4 p.m. mini stack? We got Carolina, Arizona, Minnesota, LA Chargers, Philly, Denver, and Seattle, Green Bay at the 4 p.m. slot.
Yeah, you know what? I actually do really like the idea of like miniing that Minnesota LA Chargers game. I gotta figure out what side I like better than it. I kind of like Eckler Thielen.
Dalvin, I mean, I like that because it flips what I think most people are going to do. I think most people are going to go Dalvin if they're going to play this
Yeah.
game just because it's such a great spot against the Chargers. So we flip that to Eckler and Thielen, you think, over Jefferson in this spot?
Yeah, I mean Chargers kind of they filter points to running backs, but they also just kind of filter everything underneath too. So I think Eckler Thielen's interesting.
Okay. Touchdowns, man. I mean, obviously last week Thielen doesn't get there, but at least he scored and saved his day on FanDuel, right? So he wasn't something that killed you in a week that was just horrendous. So 7,200 for a running back and a wide receiver. Or I guess, sorry, I can put Eckler at running back. So 7,200 for a wide receiver and a flex.
A wide receiver and a flex. Let me look at these salaries. I feel like I think that indie game is you probably want some. We got access to the Colts. We got access to the Bills. We don't have exposure to Tampa Bay.
I was just going to say that we don't have any of the Tampa Bay and Washington game yet. That's going to be one of the big ones probably outside of some of the stuff we have.
That could actually that one's tough to talking about building this early. With Godwin popping up late on the injury report this week, like that's the one that could really get out of hand. If somehow Godwin's out, Mike Evans becomes like the mega chalk, right?
And then you have so much salary to get up to Brady too. Yep.
Yeah. So what if we actually throw Fournette in our flex?
That could work, and that's
Just
like
in
that's
case-
an
just-
early
just-
that early
yeah,
week
early-
leverage play.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, so Fournette in the flex. Apparently, I can't spell. There we go. Fournette in the flex. Fournette's 7,400. So we got 7K at wide receiver. So the range we're looking at here is Mike Williams, DJ Moore, Christian Kirk, Cortland Sutton. It's basically where we're at, unless we want to move around defense at all. Do you like something cheaper than that, or
I kind of like the idea of trying to move down defense to get up to Pittman.
so we could let me see what that gets us if we move to Pittman, which I like quite a bit. Just getting at least one piece of that game. 4K at defense. So we're looking at. I mean, you could play Green Bay on this build since we don't have anything from Seattle, Green Bay. We could move down to I don't know. Probably don't want to play the Chargers since we have Thielen in this team, but I don't really like the cheap defenses this week. Normally, there's at least one that I default to on some of these like builds, but I don't really have one that I love this week. So
I don't love the idea of playing the Packers.
It's like we're 100 away from getting to Tennessee, which I think is a significantly better play.
Yeah, I like the idea of trying to get to Tennessee.
So maybe Pittman doesn't fit on this build then.
Do you have a 71 wide receiver?
So 7,100 would be, I mean, you could just play Tyler Lockett at that
Yeah,
point.
I actually like that. Yeah, I like that.
So let's do that, and then we'll throw Tennessee in.